Agent Morris with the NSA.
We have identified some very, very interesting anomalous type of aircraft.
The traffic is quite luminous and is exhibiting some non-ballistic motion. Over.
Move very rapidly at any speed or whether any direction it wanted to go. Fly could change and go to the right or the left or go crossways without hesitating a bit.
What do you think it was?
Well, if they call it a flying saucer, that's what it is.
EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over. Negative. We don't want to report.
Look, it wasn't my worst Wednesday night.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Smiles Lewis, and it is another live Wednesday edition of Anomaly Now, straight out of Austin, Texas. And this is the weekly live news roundup show for the 501c3 Scientific Anomaly Institute, aka the Anomaly Archives. And boy, I really, maybe I'm the only one. I really dig that intro. Put it together a couple of years ago during the pandemic for the launching of the show, and used some music from a good friend of mine, Sean Zion, Xion is how he spells it these days. And just a little ditty recorded in our home studio back in the 90s when I was publishing the zine that I did back then, E.L.F, Infested Spaces, Journal of Possible Paradigms. And I always wanted to use that music for an intro for a show called Anomaly Now. So it all came full circle. It all came together. Thank you for joining me wherever you are, what time zone you are in. Whether you're live or Memorex, thank you for joining us. And this week, it has been such a crazy week since last crazy week and a half now, since the dropping of the latest whistleblower testimony of David Charles Grush. And it's been interesting. I've been eating my popcorn, just watching the craziness unfold. And I think I said mostly what all I wanted to say last week on the show. So I'm not going to go into too much detail other than to say it really strikes me in my gut like this is some kind of a setup. And it's not going to end well for some people. And I don't necessarily think that's him. And I'm not suggesting that Grush is a knowing participant in a disinfo operation or some such. Maybe. I don't know. But it's just the way it's unfolded, as with the last several years with the ATIP and Lou Elizondo, it just feels like this fellow is regurgitating the tales he's heard from all these other close friends and confidants, people who are prominent in the UFO UAP field. Same usual suspects, as some have said. That said, I still can't stop. I cannot look away. And there's been, of course, more developments, but we'll get to that. I'll just briefly, of course, this past Monday on my birthday, yay, what a great birthday present, was Stephen Greer doing his 22nd year anniversary, I believe, of his famous big National Press Club press event in Washington, D.C. And it was over 3 hours of live streaming, and I had it streaming that entire time. And I can't say that I watched every second, but we'll maybe comment about that in a second. But I did want to bring folks' attention to this article over at Wired.com. UFO whistleblower meet a conspiracy-loving Congress. I think there's some pretty good stuff here. Let's see. Fresh claims from a former U.S. intelligence officer about an intact alien craft may get traction on Capitol Hill, where some lawmakers want to believe. It's got an introduction that, and I really like this writer. No surprise, I'm a fan of Wired. Go back being a fan of Wired for a long, long time. Back in the day, as they say, in the 1990s. I think they were around that far back. So it's mostly talking about these allegations, and some of the bit I'll read here. The allegations themselves are breathtaking, quote unquote, says Senator Brian Schatz, a Hawaii Democrat. It could be a game changer or it could be a crank. I just don't know, unquote. Whether Grush proves to be a crank or a game changer will likely soon be investigated by lawmakers from both parties and in both chambers of Congress. Skeptics abound, but there are also lawmakers who are curious and open to proof. Then there are the believers. In our strange new political universe of alternative facts turned dystopian reality, once fringe notions have built-in fan bases in today's Capitol. And in the House of Representatives, party leaders tapped Grush's allies to lead their chamber's investigation. So yeah, there's a couple of details in here that I find interesting, and we'll get to. On one level, it's fitting that today's conspiracy-laced Congress, where anti-vaxxers berate scientists, election 2020 remains disputed, and January 6 rioters are praised as victims, is now tasked with tackling arguably the nation's most long-standing conspiracy. I think that's an interesting idea. I wonder what are some of the more foundational conspiracies of the American landscape, besides what they're referring to, of course, the 1947 Roswell crash and the suppression of this great knowledge about aliens and saucers and cover-ups. But many senators fear their House counterparts' melding of deep state with deep space will only sow more confusion into an electorate hungry for answers, which hearings about unidentified aircraft in recent years have failed to satisfactorily answer. Headline: The rank and file are flying the UAP. The sensational details of Grush's claims about so-called unidentified anomalous phenomena, blah, 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 spread rapidly through the Capitol last week, along with much derision and mockery. Some congressional leaders laughed them off. Quote, "This is not a question I had on my bingo card," House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar told the press corps. Or they slid these latest ET allegations right into their old talking points. Quote, "Obviously, we're concerned about Congress being kept in the dark from a lot of these agencies," House Majority Leader Steve Scalise replied before even seeing the whistleblower's claims. The response was different among rank-and-file lawmakers, especially in the House, where Grush's unvetted claims were seen as vindication by a small but vocal and increasingly powerful faction of far-right lawmakers who are heading up the inquiry ahead of a planned but still unscheduled hearing. I think it's a little bit of madness and a whole lot of reality. I do believe we've recovered a craft at some point, Representative Tim Burchett, a Tennessee Republican, told Steve Bannon on his podcast Wednesday. Burchett believes, on his podcast Wednesday, Burchett believes that the Pentagon's budget is bloated in part because it's funding secret UAP programs. His personal belief in UAPs stems from the 1947 incident in Roswell, blah, blah, blah. So, interesting. So again, putting aside UFOs and all this, special operations and black budget programs have long been known to be what is bloating these budgets, is these black budget programs that have little or no oversight, disregarding UAPs, UFOs. Now, he goes on to say, Burchett told Bannon he, quote, has a commitment from both House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and House Oversight Committee Chair James Corner to hold a hearing on UAPs, though he says it's not a top priority for party leaders. Quote, "We're only getting about one bite at this apple," Burchett said. If the Pentagon, which vigorously denies the whistleblower's charges of a secret UAP program, NASA officials asked to brief lawmakers behind closed doors, which is common when classified information is discussed. Burchett's not interested. Quote, "I'm not going to be a part of it if it's classified. That's ridiculous," Burchett said on the podcast. "That's just more of the same and creates more myths and rumors than it creates facts." Okay, that's an important point. Burchett is joined by two Florida Republican representatives. Oh, goody. Matt Gaetz, quote, I have seen evidence of craft that I am not familiar with any of our allies or adversaries or even our country possessing, unquote. And Anna Paulina Luna, who believes the government have been lying to the public about UAPs for decades. While Luna and Burchett will likely head up the House inquiry and eventual hearing, it's not just fringe right members whose ears perked up over these allegations. This includes Representative Mike McCall, a Texas Republican and chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Quote, it's a legitimate issue on both sides. We just want to know if we've been seeing UAPs that are not man-made. Is what the article said, but I don't know, he says. But that's a good question for the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And apparently he forwarded this news story to that person, Mike Turner. And it goes on about the Senate having questions. And there's some numbers, and they're pointing out, just how quickly these things escalate. In its June 2021 report, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence disclosed 144 UAP sightings stretching back nearly 2 decades. After years of mounting smartphone evidence, unanswered questions, and frustrated lawmakers, the military unveiled its newly rebooted and renamed AARO office. With the department mandated with tracking secrets in the skies, sightings skyrocketed. Last August, AARO officials disclosed more than 500 reports of UAP. By this April, there were some 650 cases. And just last month, the Pentagon, which oversees AARO, hiked the number to roughly 800 mysterious flying objects. While Grush's claims of alien life and recovered craft have made headlines, senators are alarmed by accusations that the federal government is hiding special access programs from Congress. Quote, we need to just look into whether there are rogue SAP programs that no one is providing oversight for, says Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, a New York Democrat who led the Senate's April UAP hearing. Quote, the goal for me will be to have a hearing on that at some point so that we can assess if these SAPs actually exist. Gillibrand is sponsoring an amendment she hopes to attach to this year's must-pass National Defense Authorization Act to mandate that no money can be spent on SAPs unless it's been reported to Congress. Quote, so if there are SAPs out there that are somehow outside of the normal chain of command and outside the normal appropriations process, they have to divulge that to Congress, Gillibrand says. Now, again, secret's going to be secret, right? How do you force these empires of waste, these black budget programs to comply with this? But you'd think if somehow they would get their money cut off. I don't know how that would work, but here's hoping. There's some other quotes, and I really like that this article has so many quotes from other different politicians, and it's kind of playing on the left-right dichotomy that I'm not really a fan of, but it's just interesting. There's couching it in terms of this seemingly appealing more to far right, fringe right, as they're describing here, politicians. Other senators say there isn't much to figure out. Quote, generally, I would look skeptically at many of these reports, says Senator Martin Heinrich, a New Mexico Democrat who serves on the Intelligence Committee. While Heinrich remains dubious of the whistleblower, he says UAPs are a conundrum the federal government must address. What I take seriously is sometimes we just have these really good decorated pilots and navigating officers who are experiencing things that we can't explain. So we need to collect data so that we can figure out what is going on, Heinrich says. Very simple, obviously. Still, among other senators, radio silence. Wired sent an inquiry to Senate Intelligence Committee Chair Mark Warner. In less than a minute, the Virginia Democrat staff replied, we're a no comment on this. Thank you. When we caught the senator in the Capitol's marble halls, Warner kept tripping over his own thoughts. There's been a lot of incoming. Frankly, I just need to find out more information on this, Warner says. As for the accusation that the federal government has lied to Congress and hidden some SAPs for decades, we've heard these accusations before, Warner says, before stopping himself again. Let me get more information first. Well, that's not a bad thing. So where does this all go? No place good. None of it's good. Lawmakers are still awaiting more answers on the spy balloons. The shoot downs. There was these closed door briefings by Congress. And the quote here, they were talking about the balloons, and then several senators pointed out, now, hold on. We've had a lot of unidentified anomalous phenomena for years now, and that's when the military briefer was like, true, says Senator Josh Hawley, a Missouri Republican. The takeaway from that is they had thousands of sightings of these things over the years, which was news to me, so I'm not surprised necessarily by these latest allegations because it sounds pretty close to what they kind of grudgingly admitted to us in the briefing. Well, not necessarily surprised by Grush's claims. Lawmakers of all stripes are disturbed by reports of UFOs hovering over U.S. military sites. It's not good. None of it's good, Hawley says. I think we want to get to the bottom of this. I think it's disturbing. I'm probably doing a terrible impersonation of this guy. I don't even know who he is really. So again, I don't think of this as a left-right issue. I think of this as a transparency in government issue and a human rights issue and a humanistic issue. If any nation on this planet has information and evidence for the existence of non-human intelligence or for some intelligence behind the UFO phenomena, whether it be another country or something that they don't even understand, they should be upfront about it. But of course, it's a taboo, a long-standing one. Authority figures don't like to admit that they don't know. That's why I don't trust people who say they know what's going on. Which reminds me of somebody I just watched for over 3 hours on my birthday on Monday, Dr. Stephen Greer. He and so many of these people who continually assert that there is absolute proof and they know the truth about this phenomena, I think are full of it, full of themselves and not to be trusted. That's not to say that I don't listen to them, watch them, hear what they have to say, and am curious about the other whistleblowers that they bring up, the other witnesses that they bring up, the testimony that they bring forward, the potential evidence. I've always actually, I enjoy a good Greer speech. I enjoy a good Greer produced movie. But I don't know that this was that he is somebody I would direct anyone to as a source of information or somebody to trust to get one's story out. I could be completely wrong on that. And Dr. Greer, I'm sorry if I'm besmirching your name. That's not my intention. But again, so much of this is just old hat, and I'm really not into this whole idea of disclosure and holding my breath and waiting for the authorities to tell us the truth. I think we've got a lot of information on our own. It would be great to have the cooperation of those arms of authority that we have endowed with so much of our money to protect us and to make our lives better through government. Isn't that what it's supposed to do? Meanwhile, that leads me to all the other areas I would probably rather talk about that involve what I often call the true-fos, the true UFO phenomena, not the UFOs, UFA-UX, the faux, false UFOs. And that's actually, as a segue, one of the interesting things about Greer is, of course, he's hardcore believer that any advanced intelligence, any advanced civilization are necessarily going to be nonviolent. And of course, we haven't been taken over as far as we can tell. And that's the evidence that because we know they're here, they are not dangerous. And I, of course, think that's ludicrous. It's a nice idea. I'm all positive thoughts and light. So, but one of the things he did go into and has been talking about for a long time is that he believes, as I do to some degree, that some part of the UFO phenomena is a misrepresentation, those faux, false, FAUX, UFOs that are created by humans to further their own agenda, whether it be any number of things. There's all kinds of science fiction things you can imagine. But this idea that some aspect of the UFO phenomena in terms of the reports of alien abductions, especially, are created, manufactured events, staged events by humans to perhaps demonize our alien overlords, or to, make people scared. Who knows? There's so many different ideas out there, and some of them are very, very wild. But one thing he did touch on in this, in the 3-hour, I guess it was in his introduction to his big anniversary broadcast this past Monday, was the idea that many of what people see, these grays, these diminutive entities that seem robotic, that they are in fact some kind of biohumanoid, biomechanical cyborg, some kind of technological robot. And this is an idea that actually I've found very interesting for a long time, and it's not something I've really explored deeply, but many people have suggested different angles for this interpretation that range from just them being, I think even Whitley Strieber in one of his early books talked about seeing the grays, bodies of the grays stacked in drawers like cordwood. And the idea seemed to be to him that they could invigorate, they could imbue these automatons with life, and they would do the tasks that they needed to do. Well, there's this other article by one of the active folks in the AFU Archives for UFO Research. I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, Håkan Blomqvist, who has a great blog. You can go to ufoarchives.blogspot.com, and he basically is helping process the AFU's voluminous collections, but he's particularly working on digitizing and blogs about the things that he comes across in his historical preservation work. And I just really love always seeing what he's got to say, even if it's in a lot of ways not appealed to me because of this angle, which he explains in this article, The Real Visitors, that he posted this past Sunday, that I think gets to some of what I was just describing. And it's this idea that the grays are some kind of automatons, and he works a discussion about this into his own particular area of interest, which is the contactees. And that's one of the things that why I've not particularly followed his work that closely, but again, always as a preservationist and archivist, appreciated that work that he does and conveying that information to us, the public, and his readers. But he starts off by talking about a couple of years ago, Nick Redfern wrote an article called "The Strange Grays of Ufology. Are They Manufactured?" This is an article he wrote for Mysterious Universe back in May of 2020. And of course, I know he says something rhetorically. If Redfern checked some of the old contactee stories, he would find that that robots were described already in the 1950s. And so, he talks about some of his areas of interest. I often return to the 1975 classic, The Edge of Reality, by the two giants of ufology, Alan Hynek and Jacques Vallée. The discussions and brainstorming in this book are intellectually stimulating and often remarkably radical and open-minded. On page 252, Hynek and Vallée try to develop a theory for the many humanoid cases involving different types of entities. Vallée: how come there are men, ordinary men, with them? There are cases in France where witnesses have seen two dwarves coming out of a landed object and one man with them. And Hynek says, if these reported creatures are really robots, that would solve this problem. Problem solved. Robots. No, it's not to make fun of this, but I like that. He goes on to describe a fascinating case where bio-androids are mentioned in the abduction experiences of Amari Rivera of Puerto Rico. He was abducted from his car by dwarfish entities in May 1988. When he regained consciousness, Amore, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, sorry, found himself in an unknown room together with 15 people, all Hispano-Americans. Magdalena del Amo Frechado documented what happened next in an article published in Flying Saucer Review, Volume 39, Number 1, Spring 1994. Quote, Facing them was a tall, dark man of human appearance. His hair was long, down to the shoulders, and his complexion dusky. He would, says the witness, have passed anywhere unnoticed. This man said that he was human, just like them, who had come here from another planet in our galaxy. On either side of him, there was a dwarf, similar to those we have already described. Almost all of those present in the chamber gazed with horror at the two creatures. He, the man, seized hold of its dwarf face with one hand and turned it to the right and left, at the same time saying that they should have no fear of these entities as they were biological robots created by them for certain kinds of work, and that they were quite inoffensive. So he goes on and talks about this recurring theme of robots being related. Now, again, and always in this case, they're the dwarves are the robots, so they don't look like robots. They look like humans, dwarves, or beings, some kind of humanoid being. So Håkan goes on, after 50 plus years of research into the UFO contactee enigma, my conclusion is that the real visitors are human looking entities who for their more or less covert work use robots and androids. Unfortunately, there has since the 1950s been a stigma against any serious research involving human looking visitors. Of course, it's because, and this is what I'm fessing up to, this is why I have not paid much attention to this angle, because of this idea of it's so much of the contactee literature seems like it's been discredited. There seems to be so many hoax elements that it's hard to get past that and go, well, okay, so maybe there is something truthful to these contactee cases. I do try to keep my mind open about that possibility, but it just tends to close because, I mean, once you accept the idea that there are aliens, alleged aliens that look enough like us that they can pass for us, it just gets really paranoid from there. And then also just the whole thing of, well, then how can you even tell that they're not just humanoids pulling the wool over your eyes, faking you, staging something? That to me has always been the Occam's razor's simplest explanation, is that these are covert human operations designed to convince the witnesses of extraterrestrials in the simplest way possible, and going off to this idea that, well, of course aliens look like us because we're the best, right? God made us. This is the best thing on offer out there in the universe. If it was an octopus or something like the movie Arrival, I don't think most people would be able to get on board with communing with those alien space brothers with 8 tentacles or more. All right. But he does, and he goes on to a long description of a case that I'm not familiar with, but that again just sounds to me like a disinformation campaign. But it is so typical of so many of these cases from around the world where people engage with humans, human appearing aliens, space brother types, and witness them getting out of spacecraft and into terrestrial cars. In other words, passing as human and living amongst us. And this is an idea, and he recognizes that people are going to have a problem with this. But so he spends quite a ways talking about this. But this particular case that he goes on and on about is in Timothy Good's Alien Base. But yes, here he says, very early in my ufological career, I became involved in several quite remarkable aliens among us cases in Sweden. Ever since then, I have often pondered the $64 question, who are these people? Who are these people? When John Keel visited me in October 1976, we especially discussed this enigma involving also the MIB Men in Black. Keel was intrigued by this aspect and convinced there were aliens among us. Quote, I'd really like to get one, was his comment. If we as private UFO investigators can discover so much data on this hidden activity, then special operations programs, intelligence groups must have studied these alien visitors for a long time and are keeping an eye on their activities. UFOs is not only a scientific problem, but a counterintelligence problem. Indeed. So he gives another interesting example of somebody, I guess, who he describes, I think, interestingly, as a silent contactee. This is one of the phrases that John Keel used to describe the vast numbers of people who are having these experiences, but never, ever report them. Because, of course, people are going to think they're crazy. Anyway, he ends by saying, but based upon my experiences of contactee research in Sweden, I regard it as a definite possibility that there are real human-looking alien visitors operating behind the scenes on this planet. Few ufologists, not to mention the public, could take such a revelation without developing at least a mild form of paranoia. Yes, indeed. Again, so for folks who aren't familiar, you can go to our website, anomalyarchives.org. That's ANOMALY archives.org. And there you can find links to sign up for our infrequent email newsletter, which also just gets posted to the website. You can subscribe to the website and get updates of new posts. You can just explore the website. There's tons of archives there, and there's going to be more and more there very soon. And of course, you can go over to our flipboard.com/@anomalyarchives page, where there are just thousands and thousands of links to a variety of news and information. And I can't go into all of that tonight. That's just the nature of doing a brief news roundup, but there's a ton of stuff. Hey, Nick Redfern just found that there's an Ivan Sanderson FBI file that is now public. You can find a link there. And there is a ton of information on the Dave Rush, the media assault on UFO whistleblower David Grush, and a wide variety of other news items, including stuff about, hey, ancient stone monuments destroyed. How dare they? We also have that link to Monday's groundbreaking National Press Club event featuring Dr. Greer and his host of witnesses. But here's this other thing: alien abduction as shamanic initiation, the history of a mystery. Well, I'm getting to the end of the show here, but I did want to, again, comment on something that to me is more interesting in regards to the UFO phenomenon, or the TRUFO, as I say. And that's this article over at Metaphor Real, all one word, metaphorreal.com. Alien abduction as shamanic initiation, the history of a mystery. And this is a pretty significant little article here. It's got a ton of citations, and I do want to dive into it myself. I've just barely started reading it, but it goes into the lineage of that brand of ufology that I am more of an adherent to, and that is this more occult influenced, but just this idea of an anthropological perspective. And what do the anthropologists always study? The shamans. And this idea of the connection to shamanism and the contact, and this particularly the alien abduction experience, as having a relevance in light of shamanic practices of indigenous peoples from around the world. And this extensive article, I think it's got it's got almost 80 different citations, from the very last one, which may recur earlier, Michael Harner's The Way of the Shaman, the classic where, there's those reptoid beings from beyond are telling old Mr. Harner, yeah, we created you, man. And the shamans are like, yeah, they tell all kinds of lies. But this is a very good article, and I would encourage people to look at, and goes into, again, this lineage of it. And just one bit I did want to quote from. He says, one current in alien abduction literature links the experiences of the abductees with that of shamanic initiation. No such reverse paralleling from academic shamanism studies to the abduction experience has, to my knowledge, been explicitly made, except for a very short article by UCLA professor Douglas Price Williams in 1999. Such a connection could only have been made possible after the abduction experience had been reported hundreds of times and the recurring elements noted. These were enumerated and clarified through the published works of folklorist Thomas Edward Bullard in 1986 and 87. There's a lot more here. When the extraterrestrial explanation dominated the phenomenon in the 1950s and 60s, it was considered outre to posit any sort of initiatory aspect to the experiences. The alternatives to the ET visitors hypothesis were very few. Only English professor and psychic researcher Dr. Mead Lane, He and his group Borderland Sciences saw Etherian or interdimensionality as the answer. Anyway, it goes on, and then he gives a kind of a timeline of the literature. And interestingly enough, there's definitely some things I was unaware of, but I think the furthest he goes back is 1975. While examining Native American nature spirit stories in their 1975 book, The Unidentified, Lauren Coleman and Jerome Clark quote Eliad's shamanism on the Little Green Men, who are often shamanic guardians of the Western Plateau and Northern California nations. This mention is made in general relation to fairy lore and the global mythologies of small spirits. Next reference he has is Australian researcher Bill Chalker writes an article in 1977 on the similarities between Aborigine shaman initiations and certain abduction features. This was somewhat prescient because the Betty Andreessen account, published in 1979, considered the most detailed and initiatory encounter, had yet to be made public. And then he jumps forward to 1984 with British author John Rimmer concludes his 1984 The Evidence for Alien Abductions with a short discussion of shamanism with regard to abductions as mystical experiences that change the recipients into vegans, prophets, message bearers, or healers. And there's lots and lots more, because that's just literally the tip of the iceberg. But what it reminded me of is, again, this is the channel of my brand of ufology that I've been in for so long now. And it's good to see somebody reflecting on that. Going back through the archives of the zine I mentioned at the top of the show that I used to publish, E.L.F. Infested Spaces, I used to do a column for it called E.L.F. Infested Spaces. And in for the first one, actually, I guess this is part 2. I mentioned some just offhanded bits about Jenny Randall says she has found this in a number of cases and sees, quote, the symbiotic link between fact and fiction as a clue to the origins of the imagery experienced within many UFO encounters. Once again, this is not to dismiss the encounters as being hallucinations or of idle minds. It is simply pointing out the complexity of these phenomena and their apparently intimate relation to the collective consciousness of our species. These are the E.L.F. infested spaces accessible through shamanism, altered states of consciousness, mystical visions, UFO encounters, etc. A little more deeply in the part 3 of that article series, I wrote, whatever the origins of UFOs, we can examine the literature and narratives of people's interactions with them, even if we only examine modern accounts of encounters with the fantastic and sightings of unidentified aerial forms. We come across evidence of apparitional, paranormal, religious, mystical, shamanic phenomena, which parallel the more technological-oriented ideas of UFOs. And further down, here we see the roots of psychic association, meaning, and synchronicity, as well as schizophrenia, paranoia, and conspiracy theory. Wilson coined the term synchronet to describe the web of interconnectedness glimpsed by the mystic and ourselves when we experience oneness and or synchronicity. For a brief moment, we are reconnected to the overmind, the implicate order, the holographic cosmic organism, the noosphere, totality reality, but only for an instant. Those who dwell there, whether by choice or not, are described as shaman or schizophrenic, depending upon which society they live within. Quote, of course, some Poe thinking may lead to poetry or great surrealist paintings instead of science. There is no guarantee as to where Poe will land you, which is part of the justification for thinking it relates to that mystery we call creativity, to quote Robert Anton Wilson. Still later in 1995, I thought it was 94. I'm getting that wrong. When I went to Berkeley, California, and spoke at the Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness conference on encounters with the fantastic, the transformative UFO paradigm. I talked about shamanism, and a lot of this just goes back to this idea at the very end. I mentioned the implantation of knowledge crystals under the skin of initiates in certain Aboriginal tribes is also paralleled in the abductee implant stories. Individuals who find themselves within these modern myths are alienated from their own communities by these enigmatic experiences. As in shamanic cultures, the experiencer is both feared and revered as a dweller on the fringes of two worlds. And some more about that. Anyway, Well, like I say, you can go to our Flipboard. You can find all kinds of more information over there, and links to a ton of news articles. Way too many to read in one sitting. I hope you'll enjoy that. And of course, you can find out more over at our website, anomalyarchives.org. And that's going to be it for the evening. I really appreciate you tuning in. Thanks and good night.